Hi, this is Steve from AzureServiceMon, and today we're going to do a quick review of the different features and setup for Azure Service Monitoring with AzureServiceMon. So to begin with, we have the concept of an Azure ServiceMon subscription, and that's where you tell us what it is you want us to monitor in Azure for you. So to get started, you can just go down here to the big Start Now link. You can also go up here to Configure and say Configure Azure Monitoring. The first thing it's going to ask you to do is going to be to log in with your Azure account. So we'll go ahead and do that now. And when we first come in, it will say that it doesn't see an Azure ServiceMon subscription for us, so we'll go ahead and create one now. And after we fill in the basic information, we can go ahead and click Submit. And then what happened there is that it went ahead and it created the Azure ServiceMon monitoring account for us. So now we can go ahead and we can go ahead say who we want to be administrators on this Azure ServiceMon subscription. We can do that just by adding names here, UPNs here, and then click Add Admin. We'll go ahead and we'll add one right here. And I'm adding a hotmail.com address. Uh, this needs to be an Azure account. The Hotmail address is just added as an example. Down here, we can add the email addresses or phone numbers that we want to receive notifications when there's an outage. So again, we can add a phone number, we can add an email address, and that's all there really is to do to get this started. Now, by default, it's going to be sending out notifications every time that there's an issue of some kind. We can change that here if we only wanted to send a notification when an outage has been ongoing for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. We can change that right here. So for now, we'll go ahead and we'll say just send us notice when it's been ongoing for at least 10 minutes. Now, the next thing we need to do, and you can see up here in the corner, we got some emails saying, hey, here's an email just confirming that this email address you gave us is valid. So we send one there to make sure that it can reach you. And then we also send you an email when we create the subscription with a activation code. And you'll see that mentioned right here. And so what happens is when you create your subscription, it's going to enable the features for 14 days. And that email with the activation code, you can use that activation code to extend that to a full 45-day trial of all of the features in Azure Service Mom. So now that we've done those things, the next thing we want to do is we want to set this up so we can start monitoring Azure. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to click the Enable button here in the Azure Resources section. And what that's going to do is that's going to redirect us over to Microsoft Azure. If this was the first time we'd ever done it, then Azure would show us the standard consent page that it has, and it would say, is it okay for Azure ServiceMon to monitor these Azure resources? And then you can choose to say yes or no. Once you do that, if you have more than one Azure subscription, which we do, then you'll get a drop-down list here of the different Azure subscriptions that you have. Many folks will have this Azure Active Directory one. That's typically created when you create an Office 365 subscription. So in this case, we have one for that, and then we also have the Azure subscription where our Azure resources are. So if we'd only had one, then it would just start inventorying all the different resources we have automatically. In this case, since we have more than one, we select which subscription or subscriptions we want to have monitored, and then we'll click the Start Inventory button. What's going to happen now is that's going to kick off a process to go out and inventory all of the different resources that are part of that Azure subscription. This process can take anywhere from about 30 seconds to maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes or so. Just depends on how many people are signing up for subscriptions and how slow Azure is at the moment. In this case, you can see it happened really pretty quick. And so it went out, it found all of the different Azure resources that we had. And now we have checkboxes next to all of the different types of resources that can be monitored by Azure Service Mom. And so all we need to do is we just need to check the boxes next to the types of resources that we want to monitor. So in this case, you can see how many resources it found for each one of these types. And you can see it says we have 9 websites and 3 storage accounts. So we can go ahead and uncheck these. It doesn't matter if you check them and you don't have any resources of that particular resource type, then that's fine. It doesn't cost you anything more. But what it does do, if you have these checked, even if you don't have any of these kinds of resources now, what Azure Service Mom will do is about every 4 hours or so, it will go out and it will re-inventory your set of Azure resources. So if you add some of these other things, then just by having this box checked, when we go out and we find those new resources that you've created up in Azure, then we'll go ahead and we'll automatically start monitoring them as long as you've checked the box. So for example, if we check the virtual machine box, we don't have any virtual machines right now, but if I go out and go create a virtual machine right after this, then within the next few hours, the next time an inventory happens, it'll automatically see that there is a virtual machine out there, and then it will start monitoring that for us as well. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and check these things that we have resources for now and that we may have resources for in the future. And then we'll go ahead and we'll just say start monitoring. And that's really all there is to it. Our changes were saved. So now within the next minute or two, we'll automatically start monitoring for availability of these different resources in Azure that we have. Okay, we're going to continue on with our overview here of Azure Service Mon. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go back into Azure Monitoring. This time we're going to log in with a different account that's been recording or monitoring for a while. So we can go ahead and see what it looks like in here. The monitoring part in here you'll see again looks just like we saw previously when we created a new Azure Service Mon subscription. If we wanted to stop monitoring, by the way, or change which items are being monitored, which resource types, then we can go ahead and either update the monitoring after we change these checkboxes, or we can just stop monitoring altogether. Once we started monitoring though, then we can go in here and we go into metrics monitoring. Metrics monitoring is a really slick way to go ahead and monitor the different sort of hardware level, where appropriate, hardware level metrics related to these different types of resources that we're monitoring. So you can see we can manage metric monitoring for websites, SQL databases, virtual machines, storage accounts, event hubs, search services, and service bus namespaces. And you can see the kind of details that we can get into in here. So in this case, we can monitor things like the CPU time for our websites, how many requests we get, how many 500 type errors we get, the size of our memory working set, our average response time, etc. And to set these thresholds, which will trigger alerts for us, we can say it needs to be greater than or less than a certain value. So here we're saying if our CPU time is more than 20, then send us a notification. So an email, a text message, or a webhook alert. If you want to change it, then you just type in, what you want it to be there and click the update button, and that's all there is to it. So you can see there's a wide variety of things that we can monitor. The list of things that we're going to monitor is going to be different for each type of resources. So for SQL, for example, we can look at the CPU percentage, the log IO, the total database size, that sort of thing. For virtual machines, we can look at CPU, network IO, disk IO, number of disk operations. Storage accounts, we can look at what our capacity is, how much we're using in our storage accounts. For event hubs, we can see how many messages are coming in and out, how many are failing, etc. For search service, we can see what our search latency is like, how many queries we're executing and how many queries are getting throttled. And then for service bus namespace, again, we can look at number of connections we're getting, number of inbound messages, that sort of thing. So with all these, it's really consistent. If you want to monitor any of these metrics for a particular resource type, you just check the box. And in terms of setting the thresholds that you want to use to get monitored for, you can just type in, whatever you want those values to be, and that's all there is to it. And then once you've set those, then just click the update button and you're good to go. That's all there is to do it. So once we've set up monitoring for the metrics and we've set up monitoring for our Azure resources, now we can check the availability and what the response time is like for these and resource consumption is like for these different resources that we're monitoring. To check that out, there's a few things we can look at. We can go down here to the My Info page. On the My Info page, we'll get this quick snapshot of the tenant for this subscription. For the different Azure subscriptions, you can go ahead and select whichever one you want to look at. And then we can see things like what our resource availability has been like for the current month. We can see what a current view of what the availability is like for these resources. I can see like the virtual machines is having an outage. So it says this particular VM is in a deallocated state right now. In addition to that, if we scroll down here, if we look at some of these other things like websites, you can see as you drill down to each one of these that it shows you all of the different instances of these types of resources. So here it shows all the different websites that we have within that website container. In addition to that, we can go in here to the Cloud Command Center. This is a really slick feature for those of you that are have Office 365 and are also monitoring it with Office 365 Mom. So this gives you a quick health snapshot of all of your Microsoft Cloud services. So when you go into the Cloud Command Center, you can choose between different Office 365 Mom subscriptions you have, as well as different Azure subscriptions you have. And what you'll see in here are your last five your last five Office 365 outages, your last five Azure outages, what the recent performance is like in your Office 365 tenant, the latest up to the minute status of all the different services that we're monitoring for you in Office 365, the latest up to the minute status of all the resources we're monitoring for you in Azure as well. And then also these metric alerts. So going back to the thresholds that I was setting for metric alerts on the previous page, you can see here the different times where the value of a metric that we were monitoring exceeded the alert level. In this case, it was if the average response time is more than 30 seconds, then send us a notification. And so when that occurred, we got a notification here that it was, this long, 36 seconds. So again, we can see all of those different things here in this one overview of our entire Microsoft Cloud Health. Also, in addition to that, we also have a collection of reports. In our report gallery here, we have over a dozen reports. We can see the current outages for the month that we've had so far. We can see what our current resource availability is like. We can see a history of the outages for the different resources that we've been monitoring. We can also go in here into our resources pivot table and see, for example, in this case, how many requests have we been making to these different resources. If we want to go in here, we can break it down further. We can say, show this by location name, and then within location name, let's look at it by resource group. So we can look at these different views of the content of the resources we have and how they're being monitored and what their performance is like. We can go in here to the recent metrics checks, and we can see, the different metrics for these things that we're monitoring. In this case, we're looking just at websites, and we're looking at the number of requests that we've made, the summary of those. But if we want to look like at, what's the average memory working set, and what's the average response time, and how many 500 errors, those sorts of things. And we can break it down by date, and then again, we can look at it, just by resource name. We can look at it by location, those kinds of things, but it's just like a regular pivot chart. So you can come in here and you can play with these numbers, play with the data in whatever way you want and whatever way is most useful to you. Again, this is just for websites, but you can see all the different types of things that we gather metrics for. You can get different pivot tables on each one of those different types of things to go ahead and see what's going on and how they're being used and how efficient they're running right now. In addition, you can come down here, you can get a list of all those different metric alerts that I mentioned. You'll see right in here, you see I have a number of them. We could scroll through to subsequent pages as well. And then also, when we've had failures doing these health checks, we show you those as well. So you can get in here and understand, when those are happening and to what resources those are happening with. So that's really a quick run through and overview of Azure ServiceMon. I hope you'll take a minute to try it out and see what it can do for you. You can visit us at AzureServiceMon.com. All of the features we just showed are available to try completely free for 45 days. Just come to AzureServiceMon.com and click the Start Now button, and hopefully that will get you started. And if you have any questions, you can always email us at support@AzureServiceMon.com. Thanks very much.